The South African Communist Party has confirmed that President Jacob Zuma has informed them of his intention to reshuffle his cabinet and get rid of Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan and his deputy Mcebisi Jonas. This was disclosed at an SACP media briefing in Johannesburg earlier. The SACP says it also believes that the recall of Gordhan and Jonas from an international investment roadshow could have been handled better. The party says it told the ANC in a bilateral meeting on Monday that it rejected the move to replace the two men.
The SACP wishes to state that, as the norm, the President informed us of his intention to effect a cabinet reshuffle, replacing both Minister and Deputy Minister of Finance. We recorded our objection to the intended reshuffle. However, after the meeting, an unfortunate selective leak to various media houses has distorted the facts. So to create a public impression, the SACP is firstly responsible for the leaks, but secondly has agreed to the actual intent or intention. The Constitution of the country accords the President of the country a responsibility to appoint cabinet. The President of the country, however, is a deployee of the ANC and has to implement ANC mandate. The ANC is in an alliance with the SACP, COSATU and SANCO, and therefore has an obligation to consult its alliance partners in exercising political power collectively struggled for. The SACP rejects this emerging paradigm of presidential prerogative devoid of political collective oversight. The collective oversight demands of us to be frank with each other, since we are required to discharge our responsibility not merely as friends and acquaintances, but as revolutionaries with a purpose to serve and change the lives of our people for the better.
There, Solima Paila at that briefing. But let's go now to our reporter Aldrin St. Pierre, who's been at that SACP briefing to get more. Aldrin, a very good afternoon to you. So the SACP coming out in full support, really, of Pravin Gordhan, and then the big news confirmation that they were informed about that cabinet reshuffle affecting both Gordhan and Jonas.
Well, definitely, Natasha, and I think this is the big one out of this press conference. Well, there has been a whole host of speculation around the reshuffle, whether there is a reshuffle, whether there will be a reshuffle. Now we have confirmation from Solima Paila, the SACP's Deputy Secretary General, that President Jacob Zuma had consulted them on Monday. If you remember that Mondays are normally the ANC's top six executive. That's when the ANC's top six executive meet and discuss various issues every Monday. But on Monday, this past Monday, they also met with the SACP, which was, of course, a scheduled meeting between the ANC as well as the SACP. However, then, Solima Paila says during these discussions, this report, the intelligence report, was then tabled in front of them, the SACP, which details how Jonas as well as the Minister Pravin Gordhan were trying to meet people who were willing to overthrow the government of South Africa. And Solima Paila really stressing that, saying, looking at the credentials of someone like Pravin Gordhan, looking at all the work that he's done in terms of liberating this country, he feels that it's far-fetched that Gordhan, with an entire delegation, which includes members of labor unions who are in London, would want to overthrow this government. He says we should not be treated as kids, quote unquote. And it really speaks to President Jacob Zuma taking this report seriously. He says the report shouldn't have been taken seriously. It should have been looked at again. He also speaks about the work that Pravin Gordhan has done. And he says that the intention around replacing Pravin Gordhan does not even have to do with his work, doesn't even have to do with his performance as Minister of Intelligence, praising the minister and saying that the minister has done well within the Ministry of, in the Treasury Department. So they don't understand why the president will use what they call a flimsy intelligence report to get rid of Pravin Gordhan and his deputy. They've made it clear that they reject the intention to effect a cabinet reshuffle. They reject the reasoning that has been given by the president, and they also reject the intended replacement but he's not confirming whether that intended replacement is a former Eskom CEO, Brian Molefe, who has been sworn into Parliament a couple of months ago. But quite interesting out of this press briefing is that you have confirmation from Solly Mapaila that the SACP knew as far back as before the State of the Nation address, which was in February, that the Northwest will be used to swear in Brian Molefe, which is something quite interesting. And then they decided to keep quiet, not go public with this information. However, in a camaraderie way, discuss this within the alliance. And of course, we've seen what has happened now that Brian Molefe has been sworn in as a member of Parliament. But whether this means that he will eventually become South Africa's Minister of Finance is something that we'll have to wait and see what exactly comes out of President Jacob Zuma's latter meetings when he finally decides whether to go ahead with the reshuffle or not.
Yeah, and Eldrin, speaking of Brian Molefe, the SACP was quite critical of him, saying that he's tainted and he must never be put in any executive position in government. What does their stance kind of mean for the alliance?
Well, this is something quite interesting as well, is that you have the SACP coming out quite categorically, quite straight, saying that Brian Molefe, considering the allegations that he faced, which were raised in the Public Protector's State of Capture report, is not somebody with giving such powers to within the executive, not even as a member of Parliament. Solly Mapaila stressed that when you go into Parliament, you take an oath. You take an oath that you will protect the country and the Constitution. However, though, they believe that Brian Molefe is not the person to do that. And this reminds me of it was an Instagram post where we had Lindiwe Zulu, the Minister of Small Business. She posted an Instagram post on the day of which Brian Molefe was sworn into Parliament, and she spoke about radical economic transformation. This is it. And many people kept on wondering, what does this mean? Does this mean that Brian Molefe will become the Finance Minister? Of course, that hasn't happened as yet, and whether it will be whether or not it will be happening is something that we'll have to wait and see. But what we see is that within the alliance there are divisions with regards to who should become Finance Minister and whether Pravin Gordhan should leave. We also saw reports early on today where it said that the President Jacob Zuma tabled the same intelligence report in front of the ANC's top six, and at least half of the ANC's top six. This is including the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Treasurer General, and the Secretary General of the ANC, who have rejected this report and has also rejected the intention behind reshuffling, around a cabinet reshuffle.
All right. I mean, there's certainly, from what we're hearing over the past few hours and from this media briefing, that there's this growing resistance within the party, within its alliance structures. But just talk us through what Mapaila was speaking about of these growing false reports being generated to propagate ideas among people. He called it a rogue unit that produces false reports. Talk us through that.
Yeah, he spoke about the intelligence rogue unit, and he kept on hammering this home, that you have an intelligence department, the state security, which is focusing on political battles within the alliance and within the ANC, instead of focusing on issues such as let's say, for instance, the heist at OR Tambo, or even what happened during last year at Vuwani, where many schools were burned. Intelligence were not able to counter that because they are focusing on the internal battles of the ANC, even referred to them as a political intelligence unit. And he spoke about, or the question rather that I asked him, is about the Browse Mole report. Now, the Browse Mole report was compiled by the Scorpions back in 2007. It was a report that was used it was a damaging report, rather, used to damage the credibility of then Deputy President of the ANC, Jacob Zuma. That report stated that the then Deputy President, this is Jacob Zuma, as well as the SACP Secretary General Bladin Zimande, as well as Solly Mapaila, were amongst those who were receiving funding from the Angolan intelligence department, as well as from the Libyan leader at the time, Muammar Gaddafi. And when I asked him this question about, it seems as though that the state apparatus have been used long before even President Jacob Zuma's tenure, because there is this browse mold report. And he said, you know what, that browse mold report actually led to me being shot. He said he was shot and left for dead. I thought it was a figure of speech. I went after the press briefing to ask exactly what he meant by that, and he said that no, literally, he was shot. There was an attempt on his life, and he was left to dead. And you see that this time around, again, intelligence is being used to fight internal political battles. And he did mention that this rogue unit within the intelligence department, the State Security Department, should be brought to an end, and someone must be held accountable.
All right, Aldrin, did he mention at all the comments that were made yesterday at the Ahmed Kathrada funeral and the fact that President Zuma was not there?
Well, he didn't speak about the Kathrada funeral per se. But quite interesting, though, speaking about President Jacob Zuma and what happened at the Kathrada funeral, where you have Kgalema Motlanthe, who read that open letter from Ahmed Kathrada to President Jacob Zuma, calling on the president to submit to the will of the people, and this gaining momentum and a call for him to resign. The question that was then put to him, and it was put in in different ways to Solly Mapaila, around whether President Jacob Zuma is really fit to hold office. One of the questions that I asked, for instance, is that you have President Jacob Zuma, you have Pravin Gordhan, you have these two people, and it's quite clear that the relationship between the two have broken down. One must go, and they have been clear that Pravin Gordhan has done well, so he shouldn't go. So isn't it that President Jacob Zuma should go? They say that that's a decision that the ANC structures would have to make. He also made an example of the 89 billion rand that was lost through the economy, when President Jacob Zuma decided to fire Nhlanhla Nene, then Minister of Finance, and brought in Des van Rooyen and later changed to Pravin Gordhan, that the country lost about 89 billion rand. And he said those were serious mistakes and somebody should be held accountable. However, though, he's not saying that that someone is President Jacob Zuma. Also made the case that he mentioned that there are many mistakes that have been made within the party. And I made the case that if you look at the elective conference of the ANC, which is coming up in December here in Johannesburg, President Jacob Zuma has made it clear that he will not stand for a third term within the ANC as the ANC's president. However, though, even though there will be a new president of the ANC, President Jacob Zuma will remain the president of the country, which means for about 2 years, which means that he still has executive powers that have led to decisions that have been taken that have made the country lose 89 billion rand. However, though, he did not want to say, this is Solly Mapaila, whether President Jacob Zuma should go. He said that's a decision that the people of South Africa should make up their minds whether President Jacob should go, and he didn't want to say whether President Jacob Zuma is considered to be a counter-revolutionary at this stage.
So then it seems, Aldrin, that the country is just waiting for some sort of possible announcement to be made on the future of the Finance Minister. Is there an indication of when an announcement could be made?
Still no clear indication. I understand that there will be a cabinet briefing today, but I doubt, though, that at that cabinet briefing, the issue around the cabinet reshuffle will be confirmed, because we need to hear about this from President Jacob Zuma. And as I highlighted earlier on, it's quite clear that the relationship between President Jacob Zuma and Pravin Gordhan has broken down. If President Jacob Zuma has taken this intelligence report and used this intelligence report to try and reshuffle a cabinet, it's quite weird to expect the president who believes in this report and the findings of this report to still have a relationship or confidence in Pravin Gordhan, that Pravin Gordhan is someone who's capable of being within the executive of government and will be somebody that is willing to lead government with. So that will be something quite interesting that we'll have to wait and see whether President Jacob Zuma will effect his initial intentions of a cabinet reshuffle and who that replacement would be.
All right, Aldrin, thanks so much. We'll have to leave it there. Aldrin Sampear, live from Cosatu House.